if this recording reached the public. Then someone either died with more courage than sense, or the people who sealed our mountain decided the truth had become cheaper than keeping it buried. My name is Master Sergeant Daniel Vale, former lead spotter and signals liaison for Joint Task Group Alder. Officially, our team never existed. Unofficially, we were assembled because something in the Cascade Mountains had already killed a survey crew, a Forest Service helicopter, and 2 platoons of men who were too disciplined to invent what they reported. We were not sent there to investigate. We were sent there to finish it. The first thing I remember is the cold, not ordinary alpine cold. This was a surgical cold, thin and exact, like steel pressed behind the eyes. It leaked through Gore-Tex, through fleece, through the insulated lining of my gloves, and settled against the bones in my wrists. Every breath tasted of pine resin, wet granite, and the metallic tang that rises before heavy snow. The rotor washed from the MH-47 flattened the tree line below us and drove needles, ice grit, and pulverized bark against my face shield. Over the headset, the pilot sounded too calm. Alder actual, 30 seconds. LZ is green. I lay against my ruck and looked past the open ramp at miles of black timber, climbing into white ridges. Moonlight washed the upper slopes, and the glaciers on the high faces shone like exposed teeth. Somewhere under that wilderness sat Listening Station Bellwether, a Cold War relay site converted 3 months earlier into a geophysical observatory. The scientists there had been tracking harmonic tremors under Mount Rainier, microseismic anomalies under Glacier Peak, and something the brief simply called coordinated biothermal movement. I heard Ramirez shift beside me. Sergeant First Class Eli Ramirez, my shooter, best long-range rifleman I ever worked with. He tapped the suppressor on his M2010 lightly against his boot and leaned toward my ear. "You smell that?" I did. Under the aviation fuel and the cedar sap and the frozen air, there was another odor drifting up a ravine. Sweet at first, then rotten, like apples left in a sealed cellar with blood. "Yeah," I said, "that isn't deadfall." The green light flashed. We stepped into the wash. The snow took us to mid-calf. It squealed under our weight, dry on top, wet underneath, the crust collapsing in brittle sheets. Around us, the rest of Alder spread into a defensive half-circle, shapes in white over whites in dark packs, 2 sniper pairs, 1 reconnaissance section, 1 CBRN specialist, 1 geologist from DARPA, whose civilian parka still looked too clean for the mountain. Captain Hanavos led the operation, moving through the rotor fog with a hand on her carbine and a map case strapped to her chest. No one talked until the helicopter noise faded. Then the mountain answered. Talk, talk, talk. It came from somewhere beyond the trees, sharp and hollow, like a fingernail striking old glass. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Not an animal call, not wood on wood. The sound skipped across the snowfield and slipped under my helmet pads. Ramirez turned his head slowly. So did everyone else. Voss Keeter throat mic. Report source. Nobody had one. The forest ahead looked normal if you stayed shallow with your eyes. Fir trunks, wind-fallen snags, powder drifted over boulders. But once we advanced 50 meters and our red lens lights began cutting between the trunks, the normal shape of the place broke apart. The snow was wrong. It had been disturbed in rings. Not tracks, not drag marks. Rings, broad, shallow circles impressed into the surface one inside another, as if something heavy had settled there repeatedly and rotated without feet. Pine needles had been pressed into those grooves until they formed dark spiral bands beneath the crust. I knelt and touched one with a glove finger. The snow around it was colder than the rest. So cold it burned. Dr. Halden, the geologist, crouched beside me with a sampling probe. His breath steamed through a balaclava. "These are consistent with the images from Bellwether," he said. "Radio compression with no discrete limb signatures." In English, Ramirez muttered. Halden swallowed. Whatever made this didn't walk. We moved by bounds through the timber. My job was to build the invisible picture. Wind, line of sight, radio discipline, heat signatures, acoustic reflections. On paper, simple. Establish overwatch above Bellwether. Confirm hostile presence. Neutralize as required. Extract before dawn whether close the passes. The mountain made paper feel childish. Every time we halted, that knocking returned. Talk, 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 near, then far, then suddenly above us. Faint through the limbs where rime ice clung like bone growth. The men started checking elevation, without being told. I scanned the canopy through thermal, expecting owls, cats, anything with a body. The display gave me branches, snow pillows, and black gaps so cold they flattened the sensor. My thumb stayed on the focus wheel until the rubber wore warm. At 0120, we found the first body. Private Reeves from the missing infantry cordon. His remains were suspended between two firs 6 feet off the ground, pinned there by strips of frozen tissue that had once been his own abdomen. No scavenger had done that. His plate carrier had been opened neatly. His rib cage was spread like doors. The organs were gone except for the heart, which had been returned upside down into the cavity. Frost feathered his eyelashes. His face was gray and peaceful in a way that made it worse. A prayer card was tucked under his chin. Voss ordered silence. Ellis, our CBRN man, checked the corpse for spores, residue, corrosion, anything exotic. Nothing. Just blood frozen black, and a smell so thick with iron and sweetness it coated the tongue. Ramirez looked past the body, not at it. This is display behavior, he said. Voss answered without turning. I know. I followed his gaze. On the trunk behind Reeves, carved through bark into pale wood, was a spiral, a precise, deep spiral the length of a human torso. Each groove clean as if cut by a surgical bit. Sap had frozen along its edges in clear beads. Under my light, it looked like an open ear. Then Reeves opened his eyes. He did not move. His lungs did not fill. But his eyes opened, clouded and milk pale, and his jaw clicked once against his teeth. Talk, talk, talk. The sound came from inside his chest. Ellis stumbled back. Ramirez raised a rifle. I remember the way the muzzle trembled 1 millimeter left, then corrected. Before anyone fired, the dead private's tongue pushed slowly between his lips. Something moved under it, segment by segment, stretching the flesh as it emerged. It was not a parasite. It was a finger, a thin white finger jointed in too many places, unfolding from the throat as if his body had been turned into a glove. Ramirez fired first. The suppressed shot cracked flat in the timber and tore through Reeves' mouth. Bone mist sprayed across the bark. The white finger vanished back into ruined throat, so quickly it felt like a reflex from the corpse itself. Then the entire body convulsed. The strips of tissue pinning him between the trunks tightened like drawn wire. His arms snapped outward. A wet pressure wave rolled through the air, and every radio in our stack hissed at once. Contact front. Voss shouted. Movement erupted in the dark beyond the hanging body. I saw pieces before I saw shape. A shoulder joint bending the wrong direction. A hand with 6 translucent digits wrapped around a trunk higher than any man could reach. A face that was no face at all, just a pale elliptical plate split by vertical seams. They did not rush us like animals. They repositioned, flanked, used the deadfall for cover. One crossed my thermal scope in a burst of black absence, colder than the ground around it, then disappeared behind a wind throw. The recon section opened fire. Suppressed carbines thudded. Snow kicked in clean, precise lines through the brush. One of the things answered by striking the trees around us. Talk, talk, talk. Now it was loud, close enough to vibrate in my molars. Ellis screamed, not from fear, from pain. He dropped to one knee, clutching the side of his helmet. Blood leaked between his fingers. I grabbed his harness and dragged him behind a stump, while Ramirez worked the bolt and sent another round into the dark. The air smelled of propellant, sap, and the sweet rot from Reeves' open chest. My face burned from the cold, and from a static charge lifting the hairs along my jaw. They're using resonance, Halden yelled, voice cracking. They're coupling through hard surfaces. Can you kill resonance, Doctor? Voss barked. He had no answer. A shadow unwrapped itself from a tree 15 meters to our right. For 1 second, I saw it whole in the spill of a weapon light, tall as a bull elk at the shoulder when crouched, but articulated like an insect forced into a primate plan. Its torso was narrow, ribbed, and semi-translucent, packed with dark filaments that flexed under the skin like bundled wires. The forelimbs ended in human-like hands mounted backward at the wrist, palms facing outward, digits long and joint-rich enough to braid around bark. Its lower body was a fan of folded limbs tucked tight beneath it, too many to count before it opened them and glided sideways over the snow without breaking the surface. Across the head plate ran those vertical seams, and when they parted, there were teeth inside the folds. Not rows, concentric rings. Ramirez hit its center mass. The creature recoiled, but not from pain. The bullet punched through the translucent chest and released a burst of gray vapor that flashed silver in my light. It pivoted toward us with deliberateness that felt insultingly calm. "Head!" I shouted. Voss fired a controlled pair into the plate. The first round deflected. The second struck where two seams crossed. The thing folded instantly, all the limbs collapsing inward, and dropped into the snow like cut rigging. Then the trees started moving. There were more of them. 4, maybe 6. Hard to count because they used the vertical terrain better than my eyes could. One took Bannon, the second sniper, before he got his rifle off safe. It came down from above, wrapped those backward hands around his helmet and jaw, and pulled in opposite directions. The sound was not a snap. It was wet canvas tearing. His body stood for half a heartbeat, spraying heat into the night, then fell in sections. His spotter, Miko Sang, emptied a full magazine at arm's length into the thing clinging to him. It backed away without hurry, head cocked, as if studying the malfunction of being shot. Half its face had come off. Inside the opening, smaller hands flexed around a dark cavity. We broke contact by grenade. 2 flashbangs and 1 fragmentation. Thrown low to keep shrapnel below the canopy. The detonation punched the air from my lungs and flooded the snow with a white chemical glare. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard something new on the blast echoes, a chorus of the same knocking, dozens of sources at different depths, answering one another through the mountain. Talk, 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 talk. We ran, not a routed sprint. A disciplined collapse toward Bellwether, bounding by pairs, guns out. Sectors called, casualty numbers shouted over encrypted net, but fear had entered the formation. You can hear it even in trained voices, a hard dryness, a need to speak one beat faster than breath allows. Alder 1 moving. 2 set. Left ridge black. Negative visual. Negative. The last voice cut short in a burst of static, and a throat sound I still hear in dreams. When I looked back, the snow behind us showed no struggle, only a clean furrow leading into the trees where Sergeant Kell had been. Bellwether appeared suddenly. Through the dark, concrete retaining walls, antenna mast sagging under ice, and the square black mouth of the main access tunnel. Emergency lights glowed dim red above the blast door, painting the drifted entry like the inside of a wound. One of the exterior flood lamps swung in the wind, making the whole facility seem to breathe. We reached the door with 9 alive out of 13. It was open 6 inches. No one had reported survivors. Voss posted security and pulled it wider with both hands. The hinges groaned. Heat leaked from inside, stale and damp, and carrying a hospital smell beneath diesel fumes. There was blood on the inside handle, dried in long finger streaks, as if someone had tried to close the place while being dragged backward. Ramirez and I entered first. My boots rang on concrete. The sound went down the tunnel, and came back wrong, delayed by an extra beat. Condensation dripped from overhead pipes. Somewhere deeper in the station, a generator coughed unevenly. The warmth inside should have been a relief, but after the mountain cold it felt feverish, almost intimate, and the rotten sweetness was stronger here. We passed an overturned equipment cart, a wall map of the volcanic range, 3 drop specimen vials. On the tunnel wall, written in black marker over an old civil defense sign, were the words, "Do not listen for them." Ella saw it first. There were handprints on the ceiling, not human handprints. 6-fingered, long palm impressions in dried red-brown blood, moving the full length of the corridor upside down toward operations. Operations had once been a relay hub with military neatness built into the walls. Analog backup boards, hardened server cages, blast-resistant glass, old olive paint under new white epoxy. By the time we reached it, the room looked like men had tried to fight off a store with office furniture. Desks were overturned. One monitor still displayed a seismic graph frozen mid-spike. Coffee had dried in brown fans across the floor. The overhead fluorescents hummed at half power, strobed, and dimmed again. Each flicker made the room rearrange itself by fractions. 3 civilians were inside. One was dead in a rolling chair, strapped there with climbing webbing. Dr. Lydia Soren, station director. I knew her from the dossier photo. Same narrow face, same silver streak in hair, except half her scalp had been shaved and covered with adhesive electrodes. The leads ran not to a machine, but to the wall. The other 2 were alive. A technician named Palmer crouched under the central console with both hands over his ears, rocking, whispering numbers in descending order. Beside the map board sat Dr. Naveen Bhatt, bioacoustics consultant, his left leg splinted with antenna tubing and duct tape. He tracked us with enormous, sleepless eyes and said the only sensible thing anyone had said all night: do not let them make you answer. Voss knelt beside him. Captain Hannah Voss, U.S. Army, who is inside this facility beside you. Bhatt looked at the tunnel, then at the ceiling handprints. His lips were blue with shock. They move through the utility chases when the generators are loud. They move outside the walls when the generators are quiet. How many? Enough. Halden moved to the dead director. What did Bellwether discover? Bhatt gave a laugh that cracked in the middle. Not what? Where? He gestured toward the seismic display. The graph had printed over itself so many times the paper looked burned black around one band. Beneath it was a depth estimate and a shape model from ground-penetrating tomography. I am not a geophysicist, but I know when dimensions stop belonging to erosion. Something sat beneath the station, and a chamber the mountain should not have contained, a cavity with smooth walls and a spiral central void descending beyond the imaging limit. Halden stared. That void wasn't on the initial scans. It opened after the harmonic swarm. Bhatt said, "We thought it was a lava tube." Then the microphone started returning structured reflections, response patterns, deliberate timing. They were already down there when we drilled. Palmer began whispering louder under the console. 971, 970, 969. Ramirez kept his rifle on the door. You said answer. Answer what? Bhatt's eyes filled but never blinked. Knocking. They strike stone. Ducks. Bone. Anything rigid enough to carry the waveform. It isn't language exactly. More like pressure-coded entrainment. If you hear enough of it, your auditory cortex starts predicting the pattern before it arrives. Then you start wanting to complete it. Ellis lowered his bloody hand from his ear. That's impossible. Bhatt looked at him. Do you have children? No. Good. Because when it gets farther in, the pattern comes back as familiar voices. The room went still except for Palmer's counting and the breathy misfire of the generator. I felt a new sensation then, subtle enough to doubt, a pulse under my tongue, timed not to my heartbeat but some external rhythm. Talk. Talk, talk. My molars ached. Voss ordered sectors, triage, and data collection. We sealed the operations doors with cable and steel cabinets. Post-it sang in the upper catwalk, and pushed Ellis to check the ventilation grid for entry points. I connected my tablet to Bellwether's local server, while Ramirez unpacked his rifle by the observation slit facing the access road. Outside, the wind rose. Snow hissed across the concrete apron like radio static. The server contained 6 hours of camera footage and 14 audio logs before the data corrupted. I watched them in sequence. At 16:10, station personnel lowered a sensor package into borehole 3 inside the sublevel test chamber. Normal voices. Banner about coffee. At 16:33, the drill string encountered empty space. The tension line jumped. Someone below laughed in surprise. Then the first knock came.
Through the winch frame. Talk. Talk, talk. Several people turned toward the shaft. One of them smiled absent-mindedly and tapped the same pattern back with a wrench. Nothing happened for 19 seconds. Then the feed glitched white. When the image returned, the man who had tapped back was standing at the lip of the shaft with his gloves off. Both hands were inside the hole up to the wrists, not reaching, resting, listening. 2 others were pulling him away. He resisted with dreamlike calm until something below yanked. He disappeared so fast his shoulders stripped through the steel collar and left skin behind. The next feed showed the station in lockdown. Doors sealed. Sirens sounding. Dr. Soren arguing with someone off camera while Bot adjusted acoustic dampers around operations. I replayed her final clear sentence twice. "It isn't coming up," she said. "It's teaching the mountain to carry it." After that, every clip deteriorated. Men and women stood still in hallways with their heads tilted, hearing something I could almost hear through the speakers. One technician used a box cutter to carve a spiral into the epoxy floor without any expression at all. Another pressed his ear to a water pipe until blood ran down his neck. In the cafeteria, 3 staff members gathered around a stainless table and tapped the pattern with their knuckles in perfect sync while the overhead lights dimmed to ember red.
Talk. Talk, talk.
Ramirez shut the laptop. "That's enough." He looked pale under his camo paint. "We burn the place and leave." Voss was studying the physical map board. "Mission remains. Confirm origin. Deny access beyond this area. Hire needs to know if this is biological, geological, or adversarial." "Hire can come learn it themselves," Sang called from the catwalk. Nobody answered because we all felt it at once. A vibration underfoot. Not an earthquake. Too clean. 3 impacts spaced like those knocks, transmitted through the slab and into the ankles. Dust shivered from a ceiling seam. Palmer shrieked and crawled farther under the console, splitting his forehead on a bracket. The generator note changed pitch. Bot grabbed Voss by the sleeve. "Sublevel is opening." There was one access to the test chamber beneath Bellwether, a freight elevator reinforced after the Cold War and currently powered down. The only way to it without restoring full station power was through Maintenance Corridor C, a narrow service run behind the machine room. Voss made the call I knew she would make before she spoke. "Vale Ramirez with me. Halden Bot if he can stand. Ellis on rear security. Sang holds operations with Palmer. If we are not back in 20 minutes, you exfil through the east